originally, and now it's a grown project, and that's my thing.
And I'm Mitch Lasky. I was a video game executive for, 20 years or so, and then a venture capitalist, and now probably better known as a mediocre podcaster.
Oh, and father of a superstar.
Yeah, of a musician, so it's cool.
So everybody here is being pretty modest, and let me just brag about them for 1 second. Bing is a founder of EA and was a mentor for many of us who were at EA at that time, and sat really at the confluence of marketing and product development, if I'm saying this correctly, Bing, and was very, very important in the understanding for a lot of us. Tynan wrote a book which you can buy for $27.60 on Amazon, according to the price today. He makes about half a penny, so please all go out there and buy it. So, but it's one of the most influential books on game development, in my opinion, the best one. We learned a lot about game development at Nexon from reading it, and it's very popular in places like Korea and Japan and China these days. And Mitch is a legendary investor, and I got to know him when he was running Jamdat Mobile a long time ago, and we ended up acquiring Jamdat, and Mitch and Bing are two legendary investors. And frankly, among the venture capital crowd, I will say they're the two phone calls that I would immediately answer if they ever called me, which sadly was not nearly enough. So one of the things that the four of us do is get together and talk about the games industry a lot. And I've benefited from that a lot over the years. We've done it in one-on-ones. We've done it more recently, a lot as a group. And we started to open that up. We did a video that Dean hosted about a month and a half ago, and we had a lot of fun doing that. And we thought we would dive more into the one area that's on everybody's top of mind, which is AI. And I thought that Bing is actually a much better MC than I am. So he might tee up some of these discussions or some of the questions that each of us have for each other. But maybe I thought we'd start with Mitch, because Mitch just put out a podcast last week about the topic of AI. And maybe, Mitch, you can for those of us who have not listened to it,
Sure.
Maybe give us sort of the top line of where your head is at.
Sure. The episode is really about AI as a platform for games. So games that could only be built on AI engines. But I think more interestingly is sort of the introduction, the broader idea of the places where we think that AI is going to be relevant in the games business. And so maybe just to frame the rest of this discussion, those three areas are first, I think, sort of massive enhancements to existing elements of play. So more intelligent NPCs, better help systems, the better, more dynamic gameplay, things that like we already understand about games, but that are just going to get better because we can utilize AI to make subtle improvements. I think
And Mitch, I would summarize your takeaway as no bots, no bugs, no boredom.
Exactly.
But the boredom's the hardest thing to solve.
That's true. And I think the no bots, no bugs. I mean, look, I think there are people who believe more strongly in really intelligent NPCs, and it's something we could really talk about. As a longtime RPG player, I've never met an NPC I wanted to have a deep emotional relationship with, but who knows? Maybe I will grow. So that's number one. Number two is basically workflow enhancement. So the whole idea of the workflow pipeline, of the art pipeline, the programming pipeline, the design pipeline, and ways that can be enhanced through use of LLMs. And I think we're already starting to see some of that happening, and it's something we could probably talk about here, is just greater efficiencies that are being created. And I think in some cases, massive efficiencies that are created through the use of these technologies in the pipeline. And then the third is the subject of the podcast, which is basically AI as a platform. And we've started to see games now coming out, and some things that I would say we don't even look at, many people in this audience would look at and go, hey, that's not a game. And it just makes me think back to sort of the early days of mobile when we were releasing games. And I remember a famous executive who I won't name, who was running the studio at EA at the time, coming down to visit us at Jamdat, walking around the table where all our games were and saying, a monkey could make these aren't even games. And I think when we hear ourselves say that about some of these AI things, we should stop and think that basically half the video game business is now the mobile business. And if you had said that at the time that guy was walking around the table saying that these aren't games and that a monkey could make them.
That was a comment from a monkey. Hey, Dean, do you want some people to sit on the floor here? There could probably be 10 people here if you want.
Hello.
Dean, you could say, you want anybody down on the carpet?
Okay. Okay. We'll keep going here. So that's helpful, and I'm going to come back and ask everybody, or maybe we can start talk about the latest that we've seen, latest use of AI that's actually really real. I want to come back to some of the stuff that you've seen that were in your podcast, but the one of the four of us who's actually got his hands on the steering wheel in coding is Tynan. And Tynan coded RimWorld by himself. By the way, another plug for Tynan, if you haven't played RimWorld, it's one of the greatest games I think ever made. And I've played a lot of it, and that's how I got to know Tynan.
450,000 subreddit community. So anybody who has community envy, you should go pay attention to how that works.
Yeah, so Tynan, you've been experimenting around a lot. Can you give us just sort of a top line of early impressions, positive, negative, as a game developer who runs a small team, but really you've coded the whole thing with your own hands. So tell us what your top line is.
Well, I mean, I have a team coding now. Of course, I started out solo. Now it's like 30 people with 20 programmers. So just to be absolutely clear on that. I think the present tense use for artificial intelligence tech is powerful if you put it at the right points in production. I'm focusing on game design myself, so I'll just talk about the stuff that I'm using it for, which is it's not going to write you an entire game design. It's not intelligent at speccing things out or making good reasoned design decisions, because I don't think it has the context of the training data for that. But if you place it at right points correct points in the production process, it can speed you up a lot. So if you think of going from zero to a finished design spec, there's all these steps you have to go through. First, you're going to figure out your general overall direction, and that's really something that a human should generally be doing. That's design taste. But after that, you're going to ideate a bunch of solutions and perhaps do a research stage. And these LLMs kind of know everything that's on the internet, and they can put that together, put that information together. So I'm not going to be able to go on the internet and find an article that describes every crafting system used in every game, all collated and listed out for me, and in exactly the format that I want. But I can ask O3 or Grok to do that for me, and it'll tell me about the systems used that are real time and 3D and 2D and
so you can
multiplayer,
have a conversation
collaborative.
about what the good crafting systems are.
Or what the crafting systems that exist are.
Yeah.
And then it can go like a half step further and propose like ideas that you could go into.
So you enter in a conversation with another designer.
You're having a conversation with a very, very fast research assistant.
Yeah.
Who does not have
very
taste.
well informed.
They're very well informed. They don't have taste. They can look up a lot of things very quickly.
Yeah.
However, at that point, you're doing research. You're also doing ideation. So on some level, it's just like list me out like 100 different things I could do here, and probably 98 of them are crap, and 2 of them might give you a spark of something that you can transform further forward. So that's that stage. But then at that point, you have all this information. You need to winnow that down, and that's a place where the human has to come in, because you have to, again, apply that taste and understand what's actually going to work. AI is great at spraying out huge volumes of stuff. It's not so good at filtering. And so that's where the human is really essential. But then after that, you can apply another stage, which is refining what you've written, copywriting, finding errors, finding incoherencies, finding little holes, like things like, oh, you forgot, like, if the player doesn't push that or that, what should happen, right? It can pick out those kinds of things. And then you finalize all that. And it's like from zero to a finished spec, like it has staged usefulness. It can't do everything. It doesn't replace a person, but it's a tool at those stages.
And you had told me over lunch, you're just getting your team up to speed on code generation, and you and your CTO did a whole walkthrough. So as optimistic as you are about things moving quickly, you're still early on as a user at scale of the AI tools.
Yes, like generally in the immediate present tense, we're not finding some tremendously transformative use case for AI tools. It's a speed up factor. And maybe it's like something like 10% for us at this point. It's 10% faster, helps you do some art. It can also slow you down if you use it the wrong way and you're just wasting time. You kind of got to know how to use these tools at the right places and the right times. For code, it's something, it can auto-complete you things and it'll sort of be correct a lot of the time, but your guys still got to read through it. People still have to review the code. It's not something that's going to make you entire features. I think AI, again, like going back to what I was saying before, it tends to be tremendously good at producing a large volume, but it has a lot of trouble across all modalities with getting to the exact right thing. And it's kind of like the
Is meaning
image, it means
image,
design,
sound,
it means
yeah.
analysis, it means code,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Like you can get it to make 100 images of like a goblin enemy for you, but they'll all be like not the right thing.
So it's kind of like playing surgery simulator where you're in the back of an ambulance and you're like accidentally cutting through the heart.
Sort of. You have sort of course control over
Yeah.
what it and I think people look at a goblin that it produces and they're like, wow, it can create goblin art, and that looks as good as goblin art I've seen in all these different games, but
But
it's
it doesn't
not
have the
exactly the
precision.
right one.
Yeah.
For your, like the line weight is not exactly right, the style is not exactly right, and it doesn't dial into just what you need.
Okay, got it. So I'm going to cut you there because there's a lot of areas that we can go on that. And I just want to ask Bing, Bing, in addition to being a game maker, you also are on the board of Duolingo and had a big hand in their growth. And and I think you were maybe the first one that I ever heard use the word gamification years ago, over a decade ago. And Duolingo, sorry, two decades ago. So, and that is a word that hasn't quite got to where a lot of people saw that it might go, except in Duolingo. And I've used Duolingo as I've tried to learn different languages. But you guys have implemented AI. So can you talk briefly on how you guys are implementing
Well, I'd
it
say
or how they are?
a lot of smart people, and Steve Jobs was an exemplar of this, who thought gamification was stupid stuff about top 10 charts and who would beat who. You know, he's somebody who thought the only purpose of gamification was to beat the shit out of someone else, and which is kind of a rookie point. And so in general, I think gamification is about engagement, and it turns out cooperation is more broadly engaging in competition. At Duolingo, we have multiple avatar cartoon characters with personalities and property Bibles, one called Lily. And Lily's a snarky teenager with purple hair who became an overnight hero success in China, where nobody gets to be snarky with purple hair and talk back to their parents. So we made her a learning assistant with open-ended LLM generated on-the-fly conversations. And that is the key feature in a premium subscription. So Duolingo is free for the people who either don't want to pay or can't afford it. That's 105 million MAUs. It's about approaching 10% are paid subscribers at $10 a month. And then what we call Max is another $10 a month to pay for the real-time generation of questions and content. There's on the Duolingo website, there's an architecture description about the video call with Lily. I encourage you all to read it. And anybody who's interested in chatbots, the best chatbot architecture write-up I've ever seen came from MIT about a Microsoft chatbot in China called Xiaoice, Xiaoice. And in general, all these chatbots have got a sentiment module, an expert and memory module, and a conversation module. So conversation is what you do when you're being polite to people you don't know and trying to make conversation with the person next to you. And it's kind of what we all know how to do to make small talk about weather and signs and what celebrity you remind me of. But the memory and knowledge, pretty important. So if you're reading what's going on with LLMs in general, there's this whole issue of planning and length of memory, and which I think GPT started out with no long-term memory. But anyway, those two. Encourage you to read if you care about the future of smart NPCs, as Mitch says.
Smart agents.
He hasn't met someone he likes yet. I'm doing the same thing with a French AI healthcare company that's a founding board member of the fourth LLM called Mistral. And, maybe for any of you who learned a foreign language by falling in love with someone who didn't speak your first language, you understand why France might be the beginning of new kinds of agents.
It's interesting to, I think, to stay on the chatbot topic for a minute, because I think it's really, because it's the most clear example that we've seen so far of kind of the user interaction with this LLM in real time, right? Where you look at character.ai, I took a deep dive on recently because they had an executive shuffle and I ended up in the middle of it. But it was super interesting. They were like close to 30 million monthly active users, way bigger than anyone actually thinks it is. They're monetizing really strongly. A lot of the interaction is basically, it's got a preponderance of women, by the way, and that are interacting with these chatbots and forming these kind of pseudo-romantic relationships with them. But some of them are quite deep, and it's extraordinarily addictive in ways that sort of we're used to seeing in gaming. And again, it's something that I think a lot of people would point to and say, well, that's not really a game, but like it's got a lot of game-like elements. And I think,
by the way, it's a whole genre in Japan. Shuji Itsumi used to run a company that did this, and it was Virtual Prince Charming.
Yeah.
And they would have an army of writers.
It's interesting because it made me think of sort of like back in the 90s, those kind of Japanese girlfriend simulators, where the otaku kind of girlfriends, and it's not dissimilar to that.
But actually, it's a really big thing. I mean, one of the things that group, and this is what that brilliant movie Her touched on, which is it's not necessarily about dating simulator. It's about dealing with loneliness, which is every country has a lot of.
Yeah. No, I think that's right.
And they found a way to turn it into a game.
The good news is all your AIs can have a six-pack abs.
So that's an example. I'm gonna back up for a second and maybe just go to a slightly higher level, and I'll say it as a statement or as a sort of provocative topic. And the question is, AI, is the primary benefit of AI the cost savings that it could potentially create so that you don't have to hire a bunch of people? This is a big topic. It's obviously a big topic in Hollywood, and it's becoming a big topic. You touched on it a little bit in your podcast, but I think everybody, that's an important topic.
I think short term, yes. Long term, it's not the biggest.
So explain that.
I think the sort of the kind of new play patterns that are going to be possible only through the use of these LLMs is ultimately going to be bigger than the cost savings associated with the efficiencies in the short term. Mm-hmm. But we will all be wowed by the efficiencies in the short term.
Yep.
I actually go to the efficiency side, but not in the sense that it's going to let us do all this same stuff cheaper, but in the sense that we're always limited by how many experiments we can do. And that's in the process of humans discovering new creative ideas. I mean, basically any game that you're going to see in the last 20 years could have been made in 2005, more or less, right? Mm-hmm. Like GTA 4 came out in like 2006 or around that era. So we haven't been limited by tech for a long time. It's really how much we can explore the design space, how many ideas we can come up with, and how many things we can prove out. And if it takes $10 million to try an idea, that's going to really slow us down. And if you can cut that to 1% of the current rate, then you can try a lot more ideas. So I think you might end up in a space where the games industry looks more like music, as in individuals can do totally new things that are fully at quality parity with the most highly funded things in the world very quickly, and that will be the transformative element.
I learned in my early days in advertising the difference between the great copywriters who won awards and the novice copywriters is the number of pretty good headlines they could generate in the same amount of time. So Jeff Goodby, Jeff Goodby went on to Hall of Fame. He'd come up with a brand he had to write about, and his whole wall would be strips of yellow paper with different headlines on it. When he got bored with each one, he'd pull it off. There was a guy named Franz Johansson who at Stanford who wrote a book called The Medici Effect, who actually quantified that the most valuable patents were held by the people at a high correlation, the people who had the most patents. So in advertising, in patents, more tends to be a predictor of higher quality. So as Tynan has said, if you can do more in the same amount of time, with judgment, you can prune them, and the odds are it gets to better. And that's my experience with game designers. As game designers progress in their skill, someone like Sid Meier or Will Wright can throw out a bunch of ideas in a hurry. Sid Meier used to prototype games with 5,000 lines of code and pick up art from other Firaxis games and then sit with it for a while. So more in the same time has some predictive value of higher quality.
I just add on to both of that. We started experimenting at Nexon with AI pretty seriously in around 2017. We started talking about it in 2019 publicly. And in those days, remember, everybody wanted to talk about Google Stadia. And we were experimenting both on live game operations and in new game development, especially at the Embark studio in Sweden. And we had a couple takeaways. Number one, what we found it was profound across the board. Number two is it worked in none of the things that we thought were going to work, which is going to lead to my next question, but none of the things that we thought were going to be really big ended up being the big thing. It was orthogonal things that we hadn't anticipated. One example is, has anybody here played the Arc Raiders alpha or the tech test? Yeah, so if you've seen it, it's a dystopian future world, and these asshole robots come in from outer space to take our resources, and we thought it would be really cool to put AI-driven, to drive them with true AI. And it turns out they were really good at killing us humans, our live players, but it wasn't very fun. And the game developers wanted to design the fun and tune it and all that sort of stuff, and they couldn't do it. So for example, like I was playing in a playtest, I was going to pull a Luke Skywalker, run onto this giant spider bot, shoot a missile into its belly, and then it was trying to shoot missiles at me, and then it couldn't hit me when I was under them. And what it did was just sit down on me and squish me. And I laughed because I thought that was funny, and I was like, did you guys program that? And they were like, no, it figured out how to do it himself. So it became a very efficient killing machine, which is kind of scary. But the second time it happened, it wasn't fun. And so they ripped it out. And instead what they did is they put it into a lot of locomotion. So if the spider comes and jumps at you, and like that's all its decisions, or if you blow off one of the engines on the drones and it's flying on 2 or 3 engines only, all that locomotion is done. It learned how to do that by itself. And so it helped a lot, and in many ways it makes the game better because you can start to have your strategy around how it's doing it. But we didn't see that coming.
Yeah, I think that's going to be really interesting because I'm a small investor in a company that's building a game playing AI that can basically watch YouTube videos or watch other people play the game and then very, very rapidly learn how to play the game at like an expert level.
Right.
And you can give it, I'm imagining, sort of a next iteration of it where you're playing, something like EVE Online, and you can, or whatever, Minecraft, and you can just say, get rich, right? You can give it a really, like a very open-ended prompt and kind of see what it does. Yeah. And what paths it takes to try and solve that as a problem. And I think that's good. We're going to learn a lot about game design from that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Saw that done on The Sims, and the designers of The Sims were wrong about what the best path was to get rich. It was a surprise. It's we all have money plays in all of our games.
But I think you got to keep in mind the differences between humans and machine intelligence. Like the machine will always be able to do things a person can't do. They created an AI that played StarCraft, and it can crush any human, but it does it in a way that no human would do. It's actually not overwhelmingly strong at strategic planning necessarily. It's just got incredible micro skills that you can't possibly match. So like there's a difference between playing the game machine optimal and person optimal, and even whether either of those two things are meaningful for the kind of experience you're trying to create. Because you're trying to create something for humans to play around in. So that artificial intelligence is there, but it's designed to be beaten or designed to be interacted with or learned from or followed or to be role modeled. And none of those are something that can be machine defined, I think, in the sense of this is the exact reward signal that the computer wants you to go after, like go further, kill more. They're sort of soft socio-emotional problems, which are much harder to train for on AI.
Another aha about speed, there's a guy I worked with named Brian Reynolds who did Alpha Centauri and Colonization, and then started big, huge games. And he came to mobile. He was tired of PC games. He said, my life as a designer has been design the game and then wait 2 years for the art to get created. And I hope in mobile, this is in the days when mobile games cost $2 or $3 million. He said, I hope I can do real-time design. And so the promise of asset generation is also real-time design. And some of us grew up at a time when the designers were also hacker programmers, kind of like Tyne is kind of the beginning of a new breed, but also the incursion of an old breed. But that integrating creation and code and design is where the best ideas come from.
Yeah, I mean, I had another comment I wanted to make about the use of AI and how it'll affect the games. Like there's what Bing is talking about, which is totally correct, which is enhancing our ability to create, right? Like right now, I'll write a spec and then work with programmers and they'll implement it and it comes back 2 weeks later and then we cycle on it, right? So if that could be 5 minutes instead of 2 weeks, that would be very powerful. But then there's the other side, which is can the games do something that it couldn't do before fundamentally, qualitatively, by having the AI actually being part of the game, not as part of the production process. And I think that the point that I focus on with that is that the answer is yes, we're going to find things that we can do with AI, but it's going to be a different game. It's not like a seasoning you throw on and suddenly all your games are better.
Yeah.
Because a game is really made of limitations and structure. You're going to, we're not going to enhance chess by letting you move the pieces wherever you want, right? The whole point is that you can't do whatever you want. The whole point of that RPG character is that he only says certain things.
Yeah.
And you can break those limitations maybe with new technology, but that's a different type of game, and it's not necessarily a replacement for what we had before. I would say it's analogous to going from 2D to 3D, which was really the big arc through the 90s primarily. Sure, we discovered all sorts of new kinds of games that we could develop, but those old 2D styles of games are still completely valid. We still play RTS games, and they're not 3D where you're like moving guys up and down. I mean, Homeworld is great, but that's its own specific niche, right? 2D RTS games are still very powerful.
Yeah. No, I think that's right. I think that idea, particularly around the NPCs and RPGs, I mean, you think about it, in a lot of ways, what you're seeing with Character.ai or some of these other games that I talked about in the podcast is actually more akin to the kinds of things that we saw in GTA RP, right? If you're familiar with sort of the role-playing mod of GTA, where people basically played non-player characters as if they were player characters. And I think but as you say, that's a completely different game.
And it's a niche too.
Yeah.
Like generally people don't want to engage that much at that deep of a level with their game. Like you can already do most of these things. You just put a human where we would have put the AI a lot of the time. Like you can play Dungeons and Dragons, and that's a great experience. And you can kind of play it with an AI. It's not so effective at it. But I don't always want to be talking and going back and forth in these complicated ways. A lot of the time, the way games are compelling is because they require very little from the player. That's part of why your match-3 games are powerful. That's part of why the Vampire Survivors thing happened, because it's literally just a shooter game where you can't shoot. All you do is move, and all the shooting happens automatically. It's like ultra lazy for the player, but it gives you back a tremendous amount of stimulation and response. So the incredible action to response ratio. And when we're talking about AIs that can do all this very rich stuff, richness is great, but I think we discovered with some of the commercial limitations of VR, for example, that richness is not better in every way. Yeah. Games are not really about immersing you.
In other words, you can have a deeply immersive game with 12 plastic pieces, or a few plastic pieces on the board.
There's the idea of a game as a simulation of a world where you enter and you're in a different universe and everything's amazing. Like your Ready Player One type of situation, and that's totally valid. But a huge portion, I think, a majority of games are actually a small thing that exists in your world, and you play it, and it's got little pieces that move around, and that's entertaining because of the fascinating structure of that thing.
Okay, so that leads to a next topic, and I'll try not to make it a leading topic or a leading question, but as we sit here today, how confident do you guys feel that we know what the AI-enabled world looks like in 5 years, and therefore how much credence do you put on people who are prognosticators of what that world will look like?
So I would say I have probably a 5% confidence level that I would know that I could predict what's going to happen in 5 years. I think I've been astonished by the pace of innovation that's happened thus far, right? So I think just looking at that and extrapolating, obviously it's going to be asymptotic in a sense. It's like we're going to make huge gains at first, and then as I think we're already seeing, the word leaking out from some of the major models that they're starting to find weird anomalies that are taking more time to solve, and the pace is slowing, et cetera. So I think you will see a slowing of that, but nevertheless, the opportunities for real disruption in terms of things happening way faster than I would expect them to happen, I think is very high.
Yep. Okay. Bing, any comments?
Well,
Between the two of you, you pretty much have seen.
Well, the other
most
thing
of
is
the game
I
companies.
also have a lot of exposure because in the new fund that I'm not a part of at Benchmark because I retired, thankfully. But I'm helping them and watching what they're investing in is I would say 9 out of the last 10 companies they invested in were pure AI companies.
Pure AI companies broadly.
And they're also carrying a large portfolio of software as a service companies from enterprise software as a service companies from the previous era.
Which has been changed dramatically because of AI.
And it's just unbelievable. And it's unbelievable how quickly the AI native companies are lapping the old SaaS companies.
Yep.
And I think that's frightening on a certain level for me. And hopefully maybe not frightening, but something to think about for those of you in this room.
Bing?
I was just say I paid for grad school working at Intel and saw Moore's Law. Met Gordon Moore, talked about it at the time, and within Intel they knew that Moore's Law really was based on their willingness to build a new twice as expensive multi-billion-dollar fab every 3 to 4 years. So the 2xing of horizontal density of transistors on chips continued up to about 2020. Unfortunately, they missed NVIDIA, they missed the verticalization of chips, and now the optical compute and storage. So they just missed it. But right now I look at what's going on in OpenAI, and the story so far has been very much like create a new fab, spend hundreds of millions of dollars and billions of dollars to get bigger training sets. And that's kind of the Intel approach. And interesting enough, when it first started, I asked Bill Gates about it, and he said, computers are never going to be smart. I programmed them forever. Computers are dumb. They just do what I want them to do. And when he flipped and said, uh-oh, computers are about to do things that I didn't tell them to do, I thought that was a good early indicator. And it looks to me that all the breakthroughs going on in AI right now are not about kind of a Moore's law of training set. It's starting to be the hacking and the algorithms and the pre-prompting and the training data, and that somehow or another,
The software and application layer techniques on top of the core.
The AI stuff now is hacking new algorithms, which I think we're re-entering the era of computer hacking, but it's not. It's a new kind of assembler language. We're doing media hacking. I hope Mitch will talk a little bit about the media hacking of movies that he's seeing. Certainly seeing media hacking going on in books. And the only way that I watch these guys stay up with what's going on in AI is immersing themselves in kind of hacking something almost daily.
Yeah, I mean, I spent some time actually trying to learn all the AI architectures and understand how these things are put together, and they start out pretty dumb simple in a lot of ways, and in a funny way, a lot of them just seem like very straightforward data flows that are stitched together. But one thing that I do believe.
Sorry, explain that for a second. What do you mean by that?
I mean, you start out like the very earliest recurrent neural network, and it's basically just a grid of of parameters that get trained, with a certain backpropagation function.
So it's a very, very large.
It's very straightforward. It's calculus and statistics. And then you take that, and it's pretty dumb, right? This is the 90s level stuff. Mm-hmm. But then you arrange two of them in reverse, where one encodes a state vector and the other decodes it, and suddenly it's smarter. And then you attach little memory neurons with an input and an output that can remember what happened. It can remember what you read 3 words ago, and suddenly it's a lot smarter. And we didn't really say exactly how it should work. Someone just attached that and tried it out, and it seems to work, right? Mm-hmm. And I recommend trying to understand this for anybody who is really interested. But one thing that I do think my general impression is that they've tried a bunch of stuff and they've made amazing improvements, and a lot of that is coming down to compute. But there's also a lot of stuff to try that has not been tried yet. There are a lot of open avenues to explore, and it would seem unlikely to me that all of them are not going to be fruitful. So
as you sit here today, back to my question, how confident do you feel about your ability to predict the future 5 years out?
I don't feel confident in my ability. Okay. That said, the crowdsourced prediction on Metaculus, which is a prediction market, is 2032 for AGI. Mm-hmm. Yeah, whatever you want to, that's something equivalent
That's about
to
as
human,
defined
right?
as the metaverse.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah, but it's worth double clicking on that, because it's that's the point at which you take the human potentially out of the equation. Right, yeah. And that's the more frightening part. Yeah,
but we're already there, right? So I think that the definition, some humans you can already take out of the equation. There's a lot of humans who are already out of the equation. So AGI is not really well defined and can't be well defined. I don't even think a human is an AGI because certainly none of us can do arbitrary intelligence tasks. I mean, I can't divide like 100-digit numbers,
Okay,
but
so
a computer can, right?
I'm gonna hold.
But I'll try to get not too theoretical. So.
Okay, so you're not confident at all in 5 years out. Bing, what about you?
My experience with economists and watching Nostradamus is the key to being a remembered predictor is to come up with memes and not to be right. So if you know any economists, they speak in flowery language like the most successful commercial painters, and their correctness maybe is an RNG. You know, it's kind of 50%, but they tend to take 10x credit every time they get something right. So
But what about you?
I think that AI in gaming and consumer is going to make as much difference to market size as mobile has done, and maybe more. And Al Gore, kind of from his eerie at Apple on the Apple board, when the iPhone was just being introduced, he said mobile is going to be as big as the internet, and the internet is probably as big as semiconductors. So I think this AI stuff is going to be at least as important as mobile and probably as important as the internet. And the internet is kind of the beginning of the hive mind, and AI is going to kind of be the beginning of smart bees in the hive mind.
Okay, but back to my question. Your component, your confidence level and your ability to predict the future about specific uses of AI in games.
What? I saw a lot of civilians come into the game business over the years, and they all go.
I refer to them
there's
as
an
tourists,
answer here. They all go through the first Christmas. They say, I know what's going to happen, and now they repeat this Christmas for the prediction for next Christmas. In the games business, in decades, every Christmas is different. So I'm going to predict that that the AI generation is going to create bigger companies, bigger games, and kind of a bigger marketplace and even more hours, just as every one of the last technology generations done. And exactly how that looks, I think Mitch and I are going to want to play AI enhanced story games. And I want to meet the agent character that wins Mitch's heart. For me, the last
steal her away from me.
For me, the last one was that'll be the game. The only NPC I ever cried about was Floyd the robot in Planetfall when Floyd died, and there hadn't been any since then. And most of the time I've cried with computer games since then has been the frustration with DOS.
Okay, so when we all get the McKinsey report in our inboxes within the next 2
What
months.
about you, Mahoney? What's your confidence level?
Close to 0. It's less than 5. I mean, like literally, I can't see in front of my face. Actually, what I would say is it reminds me very much of the beginning of the internet, which is when I started my career. So I started my career at a company called Pointcast, which some of you may be old enough to remember. And we ended up talking to a lot of, I was going around Asia trying to sign up all the big newspapers and media sources to be on Pointcast. And it was really an education on them saying, well, we know this big dark cloud is coming towards our business, and we know it's going to be a tornado. We just don't know quite what it'll look like yet. And so we're going to make this homepage, and our homepage will be this pixelated version of the Wall Street Journal or the Chosun Ilbo or the Asahi Shimbun or whatever it is. And like nobody saw Wikipedia coming, nobody saw Facebook coming, that you couldn't conceive of a TikTok. It took a whole new generation of people, but there were a whole lot of prognosticators about like what it was going to look like. A lot of people made forecasts, and what we used, and I think you made this point before, and maybe your last season, Mitch, was like the closest thing we had to an analogy was sci-fi books, like. Yeah. Between Neil Stephenson and William Gibson, we pretty much thought we had the whole thing figured out in like what cyberspace looked like, and it was just basically mostly wrong. Right.
Yeah, there's a danger. I mean, on the one hand, you have sort of the boys' fantasy of virtual reality. I know I'm sorry to anyone I'm offending with that, but that's basically how it's functioned in the video game business. Like every decade, the people come back to it, and it just gets revived. Except this time with a lot more capitalization. but it's the same. It's the same basic. I mean, I think what I think is really interesting about the Pointcast example, I think that speaks volumes to what we are going to have to guard against, which is this idea that, like, okay, we have a computer, there's idle time. What do we do with a screen that has idle time? We turn on CNN and we let it play in the airport or in the barbershop or whatever. And it's like, that's not going to be what's going to work, right? Like putting old wine in new bottles is not going to work in this particular context. And so I think I think Pointcast is really almost a cautionary tale for how not to do AI.
I think that's exactly right. And just to put a positive spin, I know, Dean's been writing a lot about how depressed everybody is in the video games business, and I've certainly been thinking about that a lot. But let's just do some fun with numbers for a second.
Yeah.
The games industry is amazingly good at taking an important new technology, not a BS technology, but an important technology, and implementing it and making our business triple. So when I started playing video games, it was the CPU era, and we left that era at about $8 billion total market size. We then got CD-ROMs plus GPUs, right? And that tripled the size of the industry. Then soon thereafter, we got the internet. And the whole group of Korean and Chinese companies came online. The American companies, Raf has been talking about this, like the online companies that, that were the pioneers. And it tripled it again.
Yeah.
And then we got mobile, and mobile tripled it again. And here we are at 200 billion. So you can do the numbers from bottoms up, and they're not crazy, but from tops down, that would indicate that in the next, in the foreseeable future, that however it ends up implementing, if we can implement it well, then we're looking at a triple again, which is a $600 billion industry.
Yeah, and I would say that the 5% confidence that I do have in the AI future is that it's going to be more important than VR or crypto. Right?
Go out on a limb. Go out
on a limb there, everyone. But seriously, it's like there have been these pretenders, technology pretenders in the video game business, I'll call them, that get people really excited and get venture capitalists really excited, and these little minor feeding frenzies that occur. And I think the cynical view of AI would be to say, this is just another in a long line of these pretender technologies. And I think that would be a mistake to consider it that way.
Well, that reminds me of the early funding of optical fiber and cable was the information superhighway, which didn't turn out to be much of a prediction of how the internet was going to work. There's a futurist named Kevin Kelly who writes for Wired and has written some books. I think he's pretty great. In 2005, he wrote an article in Wired looking back at the 1995 predictions of the internet, and he said they got all the categories right. They didn't get the amplitude of the category success. At Electronic Arts in 2008, the head of sales said that e-commerce is never going to be more than 5% of commerce. And that thinking still might persist in some way. But Kevin Kelly said the big surprise in 2005 is that half of the web pages were amateur created. In the history of media, it was the pro stuff that we all noticed. And I think the amateur created and then the amateurs turning pros is probably 90% of the internet now.
That's a really good one. I want to ask Tynan that question, which is what is your opinion of vibe coding?
Vibe coding. Okay, so yeah, my understanding of vibe coding is this is a term for, in its strictest form, essentially not reading any of your code and just having the AI try to spit something out as fast as you can. This can create toys right now. It can't create any meaningful amount of video game. It's essentially a tech demo, and it's really analogous to what you get out of an AI from, say, an image. Like, it'll make you an image, but it'll never be the right one. So, it's not sustainable. It's not expandable right now. If the machines can get a lot better at coding, then that could be a lot more valuable. And, if you do end up in a situation where the production cost is that low, then that could transform the structure of the business into, you would see a lot more games from a lot more people that are a lot more niche, essentially. Like, hey, pay someone to play music at your wedding, you can like pay some people to make a game for you and your friends, like that sort of situation. That could be the end state of it, potentially.
It's going to be interesting. I mean, one company I'm watching to see how this kind of plays out in real time is Roblox. And I think if you didn't see their Q1, they absolutely crushed it in Q. Like, where everybody else is dying on the vine, Roblox is their hours played were up like 30%.
Yeah.
And engagement up 26% in the quarter, year over year, but just in the quarter. So, like, extraordinary performance, and that is like there's going to be a lot of really interesting UGC experimentation that goes on in there if they are open to it.
Yep.
And that's a company I'm keeping an eye on, I think, to as just kind of a playground for some of these ideas.
And sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I don't see. I mean, you're talking about the situations from the past of people who got bowled over by new technology. I don't see it as a negative at all for the industry. Certainly a general positive. It's just something that has to be adapted to and restructured for.
Well, I think that's exactly right. And the people who pioneered the new generation were the new technologies were a new generation. In the early days of the internet, Barry Diller was like the god of the entertainment business, right? And Michael Eisner and people like that. And then there were some who could really adapt, and then there was a new generation of companies.
Yeah, I think that one of the interesting things about the previous generations is that the big surprise was not what we were able to do with the tech, but how humans responded at scale to those different things. Like, we always knew, okay, if you had a network, you could put newspapers on the internet, and that's obvious, right? And you always knew that, okay, you could look at your friend's cat pictures, but you wouldn't have thought that necessarily you could build a network where people just share images of each other, or like little videos that they made at home, and that would be finessed into something that's so incredibly addictive and compelling that people would spend hours and hours and hours a day on it and get addicted to it. Like it was obvious you could do something like that, but you wouldn't think it would be that powerful. And similarly for some of these early comments about mobile games, they are very simple looking, right? And if you're used to the idea that bigger is better in games, and like more story, more interaction is the stronger thing, then the idea that this tiny, very minimal experience is going to be so compelling wouldn't be obvious at all. And from a 90s point of view, that is not obvious.
Yeah, like individuals blow open the old cliches and bromides that exist that become awesome.
And I think it leads to sort of a lesson that we can all learn from this, which is something we paid attention to in the early days of mobile, which is don't like watch what people are doing. Right.
Yeah.
Like, and again, it's like my partner, Matt Kohler at Benchmark, who was like employee number 7 at Facebook and employee number 5 at LinkedIn, like a guy who had really good instincts for early stage companies. He was always like, our job isn't to predict the future as venture capitalists. Our job is to see what's happening now very, very clearly.
Yeah.
And I think that, again, I like what I'm trying to do is pay attention to what's actually happening and to not try and prognosticate too much, and to see where people are finding pleasure, where people are finding frustration with the current tool set and with the current offerings. And I think there's a lot to learn if you kind of keep an open mind and look at those things and don't just sort of do what our friend did at Electronic Arts and just say a monkey could make these.
But you do have to prognosticate who's going to be able to drive and ride the wave. So what do you look for?
That's an investment bet. That's an investment bet.
What do you look for at a signal? I was asking Tynan, who do you hire to be these rapid learners of stuff that nobody already knows about?
And I think what we're seeing is that the characteristic of the entrepreneur for this era is extraordinarily iterative, like highly experimental, and like not married to any idea, willing to pivot on a dime.
Okay, and there's another side of it too, if we have one more second, which
Go
is,
ahead. Yeah.
I think last time around with the internet and this time, a lot of the surprises came from consumers who were very different from the people who are making the product. As in, people like, who love The Sims are very different from the people who are playing games when it was created. Right. And I think it was very, like, it would be like, oh, this doesn't appeal to me, therefore it shouldn't appeal to anyone. And you might think about that for little match 3 games, which, would be played by a very different type of person who engages in a very different kind of way than you or anybody in your bubble, right? So I think a lot of the time it's just a human surprise of realizing that there's all these type of people out there who are unlike me. Like, I wouldn't play a first-person shooter on a mobile device, but there's like 1 billion people in Asia who want to do that because that's their best option, for example.
Yeah, my daughter who's here, Chloe, is the person who convinced me to get a marketing budget to launch The Sims. Because all the boys in the game business in 99, 2000 could prove that girls didn't play games and dollhouses never played games. And so it had a lifetime forecast at 200,000 units. And I had a daughter who was the voice of the new consumer who convinced me, Daddy, everybody else is wrong.
Thank you, Chloe. So before Dean gives us the hook, I'd like to ask some questions. Yeah. Looks.
So AI has a huge cost when it's being used.
Yes.
Is that an excuse then for studios when they're replacing artists, say? Are they just passing the buck then to the tech companies?
I think I'm really glad you asked that question, because I think that's kind of the dirty little secret right now, because there is this tendency in the business to hand wave the compute cost associated with it. It's like we were talking about before, like there's a really compelling currently shipping and monetizing game that's got a per user compute cost that makes it utterly like unprofitable forever.
Negative
basically.
gross margins.
Yeah, I mean forever.
Yeah.
Like there's just no way you could. And so now when you talk to the entrepreneur, they're like, yeah, it's going to zero. It's like it's going to be dial tone, like the ability to get this level of inference, that the cost will come down orders and orders and orders of magnitude. And while I believe that to a certain extent, I think I would look at the cloud, where we heard the same kinds of things 15 years ago, and go look at your Amazon Web Services bill. It's like it ain't zero. And so I do think that is something that we need to be very cognizant of as we move forward, where we're basically just replacing human labor costs with like compute cost in the cloud.
Great.
I'd say if it can be outsourced, it can be automated.
Okay, next question in the back.
I mean, if we're talking about an AI solo generating a game like without a prompt, I think that would kind of be the last stage you'd get to. And if they can do that effectively, then I mean, you're talking about artificial superintelligence, which is currently sci-fi, not theoretically impossible. Yeah, it's kind of hard to predict the future to that point or past that point. Right,
Well,
but that's a subset of, like, if you can do that, you can pretty much do
The
everything.
subcategories of games expanded pretty dramatically. You know, it used to just be kind of, action story simulation. And as our players have started adopting single subcategories or even single games as hobbies, I think now Fortnite is its own category. And you can lump it into other categories. By the way, same thing happened with sports stats. With more interesting information, the number of stats that are available has also exploded. So, we're going to have the same Cambrian explosion of categories going forward.
I think that's right.
Okay, other question in the red here.
I had a question about unpredictability when you're using AI. I remember, I think it was you said, like, one of the bots sat on you and they were like, you didn't program it to do that.
Yeah.
How are you guys adding constraints and dialing in that unpredictability when you're using AI? Do you think it'll be a problem down the line?
Well, I'm going to say this as a non-game developer, and I'm going to do it with embarrassment while Tynan looks at me sideways, like, oh, God. They thought it was a cool idea, and I particularly thought it was a really cool idea because I thought a game about, again, asshole AIs that come and steal our stuff, powered by actual asshole AIs, would be pretty. It was stealing. Would be pretty cool. And we ended up ripping it out, as I said, because it kind of didn't work. The answer to your question lies in the last question, which is at what point can machines start to tune in a way that optimizes for fun? So you have to go through a whole process of defining what fun is all about. Now, there are ways to go about doing that. You could get into topic of testing and things like that. I'd say the answer is I'd go back to what we were just talking about, which is I don't know. But I have some vague sense of what the road is that we have to go down because I've been through the process of the development of that game, which took a couple pivots and went through that process. So that's my answer. These guys may have better answers.
Yeah, I mean, the current answer in development is that the AI makes you candidates and you look at them, and if they're not the right thing, you don't put them in, basically.
Also in the front row, there's a guy named Rich Hilleman, who is a producer of the original Madden football. And we learned early on that there was this money play in Madden that the punter would receive the snap and run straight backwards. and the defensive player AI would get screwed up, and the punter, who was the worst athlete on the field, could score a touchdown. And we called those money plays. And we were every year in Madden when it came out, they would take out last year's money plays and new ones would come in. So anybody who's a gamer probably remembers gaming their teachers, gaming their parents, gaming their friends, gaming their siblings. We game our games, and one of the things that you do with something like the butthole robot is you would take it out of the next iteration, or you put a cost to it.
Were you going to say something, Mitch?
No, I was just going to say, before we run out of time, I want to, when it comes out, I want to encourage everybody to go take a look at the game from the ex-CEO of MiHoYo.
Oh, yeah.
I think it's called Whisper from a Star.
Whisper
or
from a Star.
Whisper
Yeah.
of a Star. Or, I don't know. It's Whisper and Star in the title, and there are a couple other words in there. But regardless, it is the coolest of the current implementations of a dialogue-based gameplay adventure game, basically. And with an incredibly rendered 3D character and a really clever design in terms of...
Can I say what the design is that caught your eye on this?
Of course.
So you ask an LLM NPC a question, and the LLM has to compute, so it takes a couple seconds to get back to you. So it breaks the realism of the whole thing. But the person you're trying to save is orbiting Saturn or orbiting the moon or something like that. So it takes a few seconds to get back to you. And that's part of the tension that gets created in the game. So the limitation that is inherent in the technology that they're using, almost like the 8-bit days, becomes an advantage.
Or
that
some of the
becomes a
stuff
game
we did
mechanic.
in the first-person shooter business where we couldn't predict exactly where people were going to be, so we used splash damage or probabilistic damage or whatever. It just has that sort of really clever use of a limitation to make it into a game design element that actually adds a little emotional weight.
And by the way, that's from a Chinese studio, ex-MiHoYo developers. And everybody remember that there's about 1 million developers that used to be outsourcers for Western game companies.
And those companies in China have no qualms about the labor problems that are implicated in artificial intelligence.
Yeah, and they're coming. So, okay, so Dean's given us the hook. Dean, do we have
you,
one
Dean.
more quick question? No?
No?
Okay, one quick question. Lightning round. Yes, behind Dean. Go ahead. Uh-huh. Yeah. Okay. Somebody cut you off?
Marketing optimization.
Marketing optimization.
Like we still, like, a lot of our UA tools are blunt instruments, and I think we could be way subtler about learning people's proclivities and getting things to them in the right context.
Okay. On that note, thank you, everybody. Yeah, appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you, Dean.